We don't often pay a lot of attention to blockchain designs in crypto, but learning the technicalities of any industry can pay off. For example, when you hear about the limitations of current monolithic blockchains and how many are proposing a shift to becoming modular blockchains for the sake of scalability, you'll understand the pros and cons as well as the risks involved. Let's now discuss the basics of modular and monolithic blockchains and their functionalities. Monolithic blockchains have been around for over a decade now. These blockchains are primarily characterized by their ability to handle three core features: consensus, depending on whether they are proof of work or proof of stake; availability of data, which is the amount of block space; and execution of transactions. Modular blockchains, on the other hand, are known to outsource one of these responsibilities to an external chain. A perfect example of this is sharding on Ethereum proof of stake. Both these types of blockchains have different architectures and handle decentralization and security separately, while also being scalable. Understanding the core concepts of blockchain scalability and higher throughput have always been a bone of contention with monolithic blockchains. We all know the famous blockchain trilemma of how many blockchains compromise on decentralization for higher throughput. On the other hand, some blockchains end up prioritizing security and decentralization, which makes them less scalable and more expensive. Take Ethereum, for example. So modular blockchains attempt to bring the best of both worlds by being both scalable and decentralized. To better understand how these two blockchain designs work and how they differ, let's first attempt to understand what the core concepts of a blockchain are, especially in this context. Data availability. The data that is stored in each block of the blockchain. This essentially refers to the data in the storage devices of all the validating nodes on that blockchain. Execution. Nodes perform transactions and enhance and progress the state of the blockchain. This is usually done by executing pending transactions in the network. For instance, Bob sending 3 ETH to Alice. Consensus. What defines the current state of the blockchain? For example, this would include the block number and height of the blockchain. Consensus ensures that all validating nodes on the blockchain have the same state. What is a monolithic blockchain? A monolithic blockchain is a blockchain that aims to carry out all three components of the blockchain mentioned earlier in the same space, the layer 1. And to do this, a monolithic blockchain optimizes its consensus, block space, and execution capabilities depending on the objectives it prioritizes. By prioritizing data availability, the blockchain aims to have a high throughput, and it will increase its block space and attempt to have more transactions in the same block. This will stress the node service providers as they will have to increase their storage and could result in them dropping out due to not having adequate resources, whether technical or financial. This scenario will reduce the security and decentralization. By prioritizing execution, as you can imagine, will make it much easier to pass transactions quickly through fewer nodes and have them all arrive at a consensus than passing them through a large number of nodes spread all across the world. The greater the number of validators on the network, the longer it takes for the network to validate transactions. If you want to increase throughput, meaning the number of transactions being processed per second, the network can reduce the number of nodes. But this again comes at the cost of decentralization and security. By prioritizing consensus, all permissionless, meaning decentralized blockchains aim to fulfill this primary objective by keeping the node entry requirements low. In the early days of Bitcoin, you could use your own computer to mine Bitcoin, but over the years, the difficulty has increased tremendously. For Bitcoin especially, miners need to perform computational tasks using hardware and energy to mine new blocks. For proof-of-stake blockchains, however, the locked capital, known as the stake, is used to secure the network. Some have already called out the difficulty of becoming a miner on Bitcoin because of the hardware required and energy usage. Meanwhile, the minimum amount required to be an ETH validator, 32 ETH, becomes increasingly more cost prohibitive as the prices rise. Well, not right now, but later on long term. How does a monolithic blockchain work? A monolithic blockchain functions according to the consensus protocol set down for the blockchain. To participate, you need to run a node aligning with the requirements set by the network. Let's take the example of Ethereum. Any user wanting to run their own node first needs to identify which kind of node they want to run. After setting it up, they download the blockchain data from the network. After this process, they start participating in the network following the protocol rules. In the case of proof of work, validators are required to put up their computational power to vie for blocks to mine. In the case of proof of stake, their stake is utilized. In both cases, it is the monetary premium that the network issues for miners and validators that makes them participate in the protocol. Bitcoin is one of the biggest examples of a monolithic blockchain, although the Lightning Network has attempted to be a scalable, modular aspect of the chain. However, given its current architecture and consensus mechanisms in place, it still is a monolithic blockchain. Solana is another monolithic blockchain. While it has solved the issue of scalability by increasing block space, by increasing node requirements, it still lacks when it comes to decentralization, as the requirements for validators are too high. One of the biggest benefits of a monolithic blockchain is that it focuses on keeping itself decentralized and secure. And when it comes to monetary networks, security matters a lot. That is one of the biggest reasons why Bitcoin and Ethereum currently occupy the top spot when it comes to the market cap of crypto. By keeping its block size small, it lowers the barrier to entry for more nodes to participate in the network and therefore enhances security. The problem with a monolithic blockchain is that the node is required to perform all three actions all at once. If, however, the blockchain were to compromise any of the three aspects, then the blockchain trilemma comes in. It consists of scalability, decentralization, and security. The reason it is a trilemma is that a blockchain in the traditional sense can only achieve 2 out of 3 of these components. In essence, if a blockchain is decentralized, it is secure. But to retain its security, it cannot be scaled and thus offers lesser throughput. If a blockchain is scalable and decentralized, then there are chances that it is not secure because there will be a barrier to entry for validators. If a blockchain is scalable and secure, then it probably is not decentralized. All monolithic blockchains are stuck somewhere in this triangle. Both Bitcoin and Ethereum have attempted to remain decentralized and secure at the cost of not being able to scale. Another critical problem with monolithic blockchains is that they are not economically sustainable. Just think about Ethereum in its current form. In a highly congested network, it becomes too difficult for users to execute transactions on Ethereum because of the soaring fees. This is a result of the limited block space available on Ethereum. One way around this would be to increase the block space, but that in turn will stress the existing validators on the network, thereby compromising decentralization. Since that does not happen, users end up paying exorbitant gas fees for simple transactions. This has a benefit and a repercussion. The benefit is that it keeps the blockchain completely secure. The repercussion is that it impacts the economic viability of the blockchain, thereby pushing users to look for alternatives. The only way to optimize a blockchain for security, decentralization, and scalability then becomes difficult. And that is why they resort to external help, such as shards and/or rollups. This is where modular blockchains come in and change the whole game around blockchain design. So what is a modular blockchain? One of the key things to note in modular blockchains is that they split the 3 aforementioned tasks rather than performing all of them at once on the layer 1. The idea is to make the system more efficient by making the block space bigger, narrowing down the validator set to focus on shards, and thus exponentially enhance the throughput of the blockchain. In a nutshell, it can be said that all the limitations of a monolithic blockchain are effectively transformed into modular factors, thereby increasing its efficiency by higher orders of magnitude. How does that happen? Well, let's have a look. Let's first talk about the execution, because this is how the blockchain aims to increase throughput. In the case of modular blockchains, the L1 is not the only place where transactions are being executed. In fact, transactions are split between the L1 and rollups. Rollups are a complementary execution layer for the L1. They function with the assumption that they cannot change the underlying infrastructure of the first layer, i.e., they do not assume any security of the transactions themselves. Instead, they just focus on the execution of these transactions. They can then decide to send these transactions back in batches to L1. The network then adds those transactions to the blocks. As you can tell, rollups effectively help in reducing the burden on the first layer without compromising on decentralization. As mathematician David Hoffman put it, you can think of them as compressing agents for the blockchain, akin to compression of files on the computer. This greatly increases the efficiency of the blockchain. The next key component is data availability. This is where it gets really interesting. Sharding is the core principle here that helps scale the blockchain exponentially without compromising decentralization or security. So when we shard Ethereum's data layer, the validators on the network get spread across different smaller networks. These smaller networks then verify various transactions on the blockchain. This effectively helps increase the block space on that chain, thereby increasing the network's overall throughput. When you split these validators into smaller groups or networks, they are known as committees. Vitalik, in his blog on sharding, put it simply: the validators are randomly split to execute various incoming transactions. At the ground level, the validators of the entire proof-of-stake network only need to verify the signatures that the validators in various committees have verified. They do not need to verify the entire transaction itself. The latter is carried out by the validators in each committee. For example, if there are 100,000 validators on the network and there are 100 committees of 1,000 validators each, there would only be the need to verify 100,000 signatures rather than verify all the blocks signed by those validators. When you combine sharding with rollups, the scalability impact is compounded. Imagine batches of transactions being processed by rollups and verified by these committees. Not only are you increasing the block space massively, but you are also verifying more transactions per second. This compounds the overall throughput of the blockchain, all without compromising neither security or decentralization. As for consensus, proof-of-stake chains help in the modularity of the blockchain because of a very simple yet foundational principle. In proof-of-work, the security of the network depends on the computational hardware that miners put up. The more complex the hardware is, the more likely it is to solve cryptographic computations, thereby helping the blockchain remain alive. In proof-of-stake, however, security is a factor of the economic capital that users decide to lock or bond to the network. Now, in the former case, you need expensive hardware, which over time gets outdated and needs to be upgraded. In the latter case, however, you spin up a node, which can be very easy to set up, and deposit the minimum required capital to participate in the staking process. Thus, proof-of-stake could make it significantly easier for a wider set of validators to participate in network consensus. One of the biggest benefits of a modular blockchain is its ability to split various tasks into segments. This fragmentation of tasks and responsibilities helps the blockchain scale without compromising security. As block space increases with data shards and as rollups introduce scalability, the overall throughput of the blockchain increases. All of this is made possible with proof-of-stake chains where the barrier to entry to the chain is lowered as compared to proof-of-work chains. Ethereum is probably one of the perfect examples of a modular blockchain currently in existence. While it currently follows the proof-of-work consensus mechanism, when it does transition to proof-of-stake in late 2022, it aims to become one of the most scalable, decentralized, and highly secure blockchains. A more predictable future for Ethereum proof-of-stake will be that as more and more validators will join the network, a larger set will be able to spread across different shards. And as more shards are introduced, the more data can be stored, i.e. the block space increases, and as more shards are introduced, rollups can consume more data. Thus, the effect of throughput on Ethereum will be compounded by the availability of both shards and the introduction of rollups.